Hello, you're watching Broadcasting Scotland on Wednesday the 3rd of November at COP26 in Glasgow. I'm Hugh Stewart.
My name's Robbie Boyd, and these are today's headlines on Scotland at 7. Local governments and cities encouraged to take action for nature at COP26. Increased numbers at A&E departments. Finance Day at Scotland at COP26. Scottish Greens say that the UK government are hard to believe on green finance. Summer snow melts. Nursery school discrimination complaint upheld. Owen Paterson is off the hook on sleaze accusations. Global warming limit is at 1.5 or 1.9 degrees. Scotland's quarterly economy numbers are released. Arrests are made at Glasgow protest. Gender equality and climate change, but more than these stories coming up. Hugh.
Okay, yes, we'll look at those later on, Robbie, but first let's go over today's COVID figures from the Scottish Government. 3,495 new cases were recorded today, but this includes the backlog from Monday and Tuesday when not all cases were reported. 20 new deaths have been reported of people who had tested positive for COVID-19. There were 49,462 new tests for COVID-19, which reported results, and 7.5 of those were positive. Altogether, 4,321,770 people have received their first dose of COVID-19 vaccinations, one of the vaccinations, and 3,911,823 have received the second dose. Now, Robbie, over to California.
California have signed the Edinburgh Declaration to halt biodiversity loss. California has become the first US state to sign Scotland's Edinburgh Declaration, which commits devolved bodies and administrations around the world to take transformative action to protect and halt biodiversity loss. Through its leadership of the Edinburgh process, the Scottish Government has mobilised a global network of almost 200 governments, cities and local authorities to agree a set of shared commitments for nature over the next decade. The Lieutenant of Government for California, Eleni Kounalakis, has met with Scotland's External Affairs Secretary Angus Robertson in Glasgow during COP26 to formally sign the Edinburgh Declaration. California joins the cities of Paris, Sao Paulo, Tokyo as the latest signatory. Scotland's government formally integrated into the UN Convention of Biodiversity Loss. Scotland is leading the Edinburgh process as the UN prepares for COP15 of the Biodiversity Convention, which will meet next April in Kunming, China.
Yes, so Robbie, this is one of the strands of COP26 here in Glasgow. Of course, the official body who convened COP26 was the UK government, in fact, jointly with the Italian government. So it's actually Italy and the UK who are actually running COP26. But there are many strands within the conference. And in fact, the Scottish Government is taking the lead for this one. It's what they call, I think, the multi-level strand. And that means sub-government bodies, that's to say local authorities, cities, regions, or in this case states, are actually meeting with the Scottish Government. And in fact, Scotland is taking the lead on this. So it's not just simply the case of Alok Sharma and Boris Johnson coming up here to make headline speeches, but if you like, behind the scenes, Nicola Sturgeon and other Scottish ministers are talking to people, they're networking, they're negotiating. So there's a lot more going on than that.
Yeah, I think that's positive. That's positive for Scotland as a whole. You know, we're hosting this massive global event, and you know, if we're able to lay a mark on this, then so be it.
Yes, in fact, we're actually playing an official part because I think a lot of people are not aware of this, that Scotland is actually part of it because we are in fact invited to take part in this biodiversity conference from the United Nations. So a parallel with the COP26, which of course is the 26th meeting on climate change, there's also been 14 meetings of the biodiversity conference, and so the 15th of those is the one which is going to be in China next year. And so the Edinburgh process lays down guidelines to prevent the loss of species, to keep habitats alive. And it's good to know that the Edinburgh process is really going to be top of the agenda as COP15 meets in China next year. So I think we'll move on to the next story. We'll quickly go through the headlines now, and then we're going to focus a bit longer on today, the big finance day down at COP26. On other Scottish news, first of all, new guidelines for the accident and emergency targets. The Scottish Government has published new guidance today for emergency department teams to ensure that people are being seen by the right person in the right place for their healthcare need. NHS boards aim to safely refer people to the most appropriate place for treatment if they do not actually need emergency care. With accidents and emergency self-referrals returning to pre-COVID levels, hospitals are seeing more patients whose needs can be better met elsewhere. Health Secretary Humza Yousaf said, "It is widely recognised that more people could be better seen away from hospital and closer to home by a more appropriate care provider, such as a pharmacy or a GP practice, or indeed managed with self-care guidance." The Royal College of Emergency Medicine Vice President for Scotland, Dr. John Thompson, said, Emergency department resources are not infinite. As the demand from patients continues to increase, it is essential that we have the capacity to care for those who require the skill and expertise of the emergency department team. This guidance will help our NHS staff safely redirect those who do not need to the best place for their healthcare needs. Sorry, those who do not need emergency care should go to the best place for them. I hope that makes sense, Robbie. So what do you make of that? Is this a sensible use of resources?
I think that, we're all in agreement that the NHS always need more funding. I don't think anybody can ever say that the NHS doesn't need more funding. I think it's also important that we do reduce the A&E waiting times, especially, you were mentioning there, emergency services. In the news recently, somebody waited 40 hours for an ambulance. I don't think it's positive, but if these times can get cut down, then I think that can be a good thing.
Yes, I think Humza Yousaf and indeed the healthcare professionals, they're saying to people, if you need emergency care, then by all means phone up and get it. But just ask yourself, do I really need to be in A&E, or is there somewhere else I could go to? So be sensible. They're not saying don't come to A&E. They're saying if it's an emergency, by all means, call us and go to A&E. But let's see if there's somewhere else where you could get a more appropriate level of care. So yes, as you say, Robbie, there's no upper limit really to how much we could spend on health, is there? Particularly as well, the issue with all countries, really, all advanced countries, particularly as we're living longer, treatments become more expensive. So yes, there's not going to be an easy way of dealing with that problem. Okay, so I'm sure we'll hear more of that. There was another story on targeting healthcare last week. So it's one of those things that won't go away. Okay, we're going to deal with finance later on in more detail, but what's the next story about, Robbie?
Yeah, from investing in health, it's now time to invest in climate change. The crucial role of the private investment and efforts to achieve net zero was set out today by First Minister Nicola Sturgeon as part of Finance Day at COP26. The First Minister joined the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, at the opening session of the Green Investment Showcase to detail how private investors can help the green industries of the future. The First Minister emphasised Scotland's role as a world leader in sustainable industries and highlighted the investment opportunities that exist, including Scotland's green investment portfolio here, which is now valued at £2 billion and which is expected to reach £3 billion in 2022. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and London Mayor Sadiq Khan both pointed out the role of private investment in driving green technology.
Okay, so we have one side of the move towards, I suppose we call it the green transition.
Yeah.
It's talking about looking at the kind of things we've done, the kind of industries we've had, the kind of products we've been used to, and saying, well, 10, 20, 30 years' time, we're going to have to be doing things very differently. So the announcement today is about private sector investment. It's about green jobs, if you like, and it's about green profits. Can industry make money out of going green? So if they can, then market incentives are supposed to lead them to that. That's what this announcement is hoping to do. So again, more on that later when we look at Finance Day at COP26. So are you doing this one, Robbie?
I think it's yourself moving on
turn, right?
from
Okay.
green emissions.
On this topic, the Scottish Greens today Not convinced, I think we could say. Rishi Sunak's claim that the UK will lead on green finance is hard to believe, the Scottish Green Party has said. In a speech to COP26 today, the Chancellor championed the role of private finance in building a low-carbon global economy and said the UK will be a net zero financial centre. Responding, Scottish Green Finance spokesperson Ross Greer said, "Coming from a UK government which massively cut its international aid budget and which turns away those seeking refuge from climate breakdown, these words from Rishi Sunak are extremely hard to believe." Well, Robbie, I'm not really surprised if Rishi Sunak's comments today didn't receive an overwhelming endorsement from the Scottish Green Party. Do you think is that sour grapes from the Scottish Greens, or?
It's something that you and I discussed earlier, Hugh. I think, climate change is the Greens' biggest thing, and, we were speaking about health being, not enough money can be put into there. I think from a Green perspective, not enough money can be put into saving the planet, essentially. So, yeah, it can be seen as a bit of, pushing the buck onto somebody else from the Greens, but ultimately the message is at its core there, how important it is to have a greener planet.
Well, of course, yes, I did hear Caroline Lucas from the Green Party of England and Wales, who in fact is in Glasgow. She took the train up on Sunday, and she was underlining the other day that it's extremely hard to square Prime Minister Johnson's words with his actions, particularly as Ross Greer said today, the UK government has not restored that link of, I think 0.7% of the economy has to be spent on overseas aid. That was cut, and that's not been brought back again. So again, Rishi Sunak is maybe saying one thing, but maybe the government's going to do another. Meanwhile, today in Scotland, perhaps this is more evidence of just how severe and how immediate the climate crisis is. What's happening up in the Highlands?
Yeah, from meltdowns in government level to snow melting. Scotland's longest lasting ice patch has melted for only the 8th time in 300 years. 4 of the 8 full melts have been in the last 28 years, known as the Sphinx. The ice is at Breach in the Cairngorms.
Yep, or at least it used to be. Yeah. This is a thing I just came across recently, though obviously geographers know all about it. It's summer ice in Scotland.
Yeah.
Usually there's a number of places in the Highlands where the snow remains just about all the year round. In fact, I myself have seen snow in August, I'm sure it was, up in the hidden valley of Glencoe. Yeah, we actually saw snow there a couple of years ago in the summer. So some of the snow that's usually there all the year round has just disappeared. A timely reminder, maybe, that it's just in time to get COP26, get it moving and get some decisions out of it. Okay, we mentioned Health Secretary Hamza Yousaf, but in a private capacity, he also was the news a couple of months ago.
Yep.
Are you covering this one, Robbie?
I'll do that for you, yep. The Health Secretary Hamza Yousaf's complaint of a discrimination against the nursery has been upheld by the Care Inspectorate. Yes. Yousaf and his wife, Nadia El Nakala, had been told that there was no space at Little Scholars Nursery in Browtry Ferry up in Dundee for their 2-year-old daughter Amal, but said children with a white Scottish sounding name had been accepted. After an investigation, the Care Inspectorate found that the nursery did not promote fairness, equality and respect while offering these places, Hugh.
Yeah, a very unusual story. Yeah, this was in the news a few weeks ago that Hamza and his wife, frustrated in trying to get a place for the young child, thought they'd try again using a different name, and this time it came up. So Hamza and his family actually complained and said it's only because we had an Asian-sounding name that the child wasn't admitted, and so, well, the care quality inspectorate has found that yes, that is what happened. So it's obviously incumbent on all of us, and anyone who's in a kind of decision-making capacity, to have to look at all applications with equal merit. So again, that just reminds us that we all have to do that. Now, somebody else who's been in trouble recently was a Member of Parliament, Owen Paterson. What was the stooshy involving him then? What's he been accused of doing?
So he's been let off the hook. The Tory MP for Shropshire, Owen Paterson, was in October found guilty of outrageous breach of the House of Commons lobbying rules. The Commons Independent Standards body ruled that Patterson, who is on the payroll of 2 private companies, should be suspended from Parliament for 30 days here. Today, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that the suspension of Mr Patterson would not go ahead in the defiance of the House of Commons' own rules and laws here.
Yeah, this is something that hasn't happened before, Robbie. I don't mean that allegations of MPs being on somebody's payroll, that's happened before. In fact, it's happened so often that the House of Commons set up a procedure for dealing with it. And that's the story today, that procedure has today been ended. So what's happened is that literally the government's changed the rules. Yeah. Now, just to go over that, the Owen Patterson story was in the news last month because of previous allegations of sleaze in the House of Commons. And by sleaze, we're referring to MPs basically taking money to present an interest which was not what they were elected to do. Owen Patterson was elected to look after the constituents of North Shropshire, but he's also been looking after the interests of 2 private companies. And this is in the public domain, you can look it up. He's raised questions on behalf of these companies many times. He's booked rooms for them in the House of Commons. He's brought their case to the attention of people in London. And that's not me making that allegation. That's already been reported. Yeah. And in fact, it's already been investigated by the House of Commons. The procedure that was set up several years ago to deal with sleaze is an independent committee of the House of Commons. It's a committee made up of MPs from all parties. And the committee itself took the decision last month that Patterson should be suspended from the House of Commons for 30 days. Now, so it's a bit like the sin bin that they get in American sport, isn't it? So, but 30 days, that's quite significant, isn't it?
I was just going to say, Hugh, 30 days can be is very severe, and on your experience, certainly more on this planet than I have been. Have you ever seen a 30-day suspension being handed out as severe as that in Parliament?
It's very, very unusual, and in particular because of the new procedure that was set up a few years ago, his constituents would have the right, in fact, to raise a petition and call a local election. So an MP under the old system, which actually disappeared earlier on this afternoon, under the old system, if an MP was suspended for that long, his constituents could actually get him kicked out. And if he wanted to stand again, there would have to be a by-election, and then he would throw himself at the mercy of the voters. But no need to do that, because today the House of Commons narrowly voted to suspend the suspension. So I don't think that's happened before.
He's been saved by VAR then, hasn't he?
He's got the VAR decision at the last minutes. Okay, so I think, Robbie, we're going to be hearing a lot more. Just looking at the news tonight and looking at my Twitter feed, actually, I think there's going to be a lot more comment about that today, about changing the rules when it doesn't suit the government. Right, next, on to your favourite topic, Robbie. What are the latest statistics on the Scottish economy?
So for the GDP measures, the output of the economy in Scotland's onshore GDP, which is not counting oil and gas, this has grown by 0.1% in August, according to statistics announced today. Output remains at 1.3%, which is below the pre-pandemic level of February 2020. Output in the services sector, which has grown by 0.2% in August again. This increases in the 11 of the 14 subsectors. In August, the largest positive contribution to growth was from accommodation and food services here. Kate Forbes, the Scottish Finance Secretary, has said it is encouraging to see such a strong growth in accommodation and food services, where activity has increased by 8.7% during August. These sectors were badly hit by the COVID restrictions, as you probably all know. Output in production sector has contracted by 0.8% in August. There were falls in 3 of the 4 subsectors, including a contraction of 2.6% in the manufacturing output. Output, which is the construction sector, provisionally estimated a growth in 0.2%. In August, again, Kate Forbes has commented on this by saying the pandemic is not over and the challenges still remain.
Okay, so it looks like a mixed story on the economy. So first of all, we're not yet back to the levels we were in before the pandemic, but there is some slow but steady growth there. Now, maybe 0.1% doesn't sound very exciting, but of course that's for 1 month, so that would obviously indicate more than 1% growth over the whole year. However, it's not the same when we look across the different sectors of the economy. So as you said, Robbie, it's not surprising after the lifting of most of the COVID restrictions in August, it's not surprising that the food and drink and hospitality sector has bounced back. We don't know why from these figures though, but manufacturing has not bounced back. There's a bit of a growth in construction. I certainly see around Glasgow. There's a lot of construction is resuming, a lot of big buildings, offices, and also a lot of flats being built in Glasgow. So all of that is back on again. So I don't know why the general manufacturing is down.
I think the manufacturing could be down to due to the importing and exporting of goods here. Just looking at it from that kind of basis, really, it's very, very hard to even shipping delays for your orders from a shop. They're substantially quite longer now. I know for a company that are get goods shipped from Belgium, it's now 44 days, which in essence before COVID it would be 17 days. So the delays are there to be seen.
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised. We don't know this is from the government statistician. I don't know whether he's attributed a particular cause to the manufacturing slowdown, but certainly what we nowadays call the supply sector tightening is part of that. And that could be COVID, of course, could be the lack of truck drivers, but indeed the lack of truck drivers itself is partly caused by Brexit. So, and Brexit itself, incidentally, is actually a restriction on exports, because if you leave a customs union, you do less business with the customs union, not surprisingly. The bad news is that some of the restrictions on British trade haven't even come in yet. So obviously the Brexit was finally delayed and brought in earlier on in January this year, but one or two things came in later, and some of the tightening of the customs regulations and the kind of paperwork, the kind of red tape, all of that is actually coming in over the next couple of months. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's also reflected in figures later on. So not good news there. Okay, we're going to move on just before we go back on to COP today, a COP-related event. Now, our roving reporters, Robbie, have been in Glasgow taking pictures of some of the and having interviews with some of the protesters, some of the many protesters and demonstrators and activists who have been arriving in Glasgow over the last few days. And I think we can expect a lot more towards the end of the week. Now, we're going to show some footage on some people we met yesterday. But first of all, news just in today. Police Scotland informed us earlier that a number of police officers were assaulted after being sprayed with paint. 2 arrests were made and cans of paint seized. Assistant Chief Constable Gary Ritchie said, "Police Scotland is a rights-based organisation that puts values and a commitment to upholding human rights at the heart of everything we do. We will protect the rights of people who wish to peacefully protest or counter-protest at COP26. We will provide a proportionate police response, and violence will not be tolerated." Also, protests have caused some delays to travel in the city. So we've got some footage coming up shortly of some of the protesters who will explain what they're doing here in Glasgow. Is that coming up now?
Extinction Rebellion's a group of people, just ordinary citizens, who are so concerned about the way that climate change is looking, that we feel we've got to put our bodies in the road. We've got to do whatever it takes, because if we look at how there have been multiple conferences to attempt to get climate change reduced, and the CO2 in the atmosphere has just gone up and up and up. It hasn't happened, and we're out of time. The governments have not done their job. Corporations have not done their job, and we have to stand up against it. And we don't know what to do, but we put our bodies in the road if that's what it takes. Sadly, the ones that get reported most in the media are the ones which upset people, blocking roads and that sort of thing. But we're only doing that because we have to. We feel we have to. So.
Well, I can understand about the COP26, the World Leader Meeting regarding the climate change, but I just thought maybe if there's any information being given to the masses before all this, because it's just everywhere traffic and police is over the places, and for the past a week now, the police has been all over the places. The helicopter, as you can hear, I can still see some all over the places, and yeah, well, I quite understand that it's for the security reasons for the world leader, but we're not finding it so easy because it's like everybody has been, one-on-one with the police all over the places. But yeah.
Okay, so we had film footage of a couple of people in Glasgow yesterday. As the guy at the end there said, yeah, it's a bit strange in Glasgow, police everywhere. Helicopters, you probably noticed that yet. It's difficult to escape the sound of a helicopter overhead these days. How do you enjoy being looked at?
Well, it's a bit like being a big brother, isn't it? I think every time you lift your head there, you see a helicopter above you. But, there's probably never been a safer time to be in the city, Hugh, do you know what I mean, and live in Glasgow. So, it can have its benefits. The gent in there was saying, about road closures and traffic and travelling around the city, it can be a nightmare. So, yeah, but I think it just kind of comes with the territory when you've got all these world leaders here.
Yes, it's interesting you should make that point about, if you're in trouble, ask a policeman. Just as it happens, I was walking up Buchanan Street yesterday and a young lady collapsed. And now I don't know about you, but I don't have a clue about first aid. But I turned round to the two police officers who were right next to me and said, I think that young lady could do with a hand. And so they immediately went to her, put her into recovery position and phoned up. So, as you say, yeah, you don't have to look too far to find a couple of police officers in Glasgow these days. The first chap was talking about we're out of time. He's saying some of our tactics might be annoying. Sometimes we might cause a nuisance. But hey, this is an emergency. Isn't it about time we started treating it as an emergency? What's your view on the kind of tactics that have been used? I mean, I don't know why people were chucking cans of paint at the police today, but what's your view of the idea of just how noisy or how disruptive should protesters be?
I think you've got your right to protest, absolutely. But I think that there's a manner it can be done, and particularly with Insular Britain at the moment, they're lying across the road, and they're not targeting the big companies that they're aiming to. I understand that it can be difficult, but you're stopping, mums from taking their kids to school. You're stopping, dads that are doing that are earning a living for their family. So I just think they need to try and pick their victim essentially a lot more, calculated than disrupting normal life here.
Well, I think most people would agree with that. Yeah, let's remind ourselves, as Police Scotland said, coming here to Glasgow and make your point, protest, that's welcome. It's vital in a democracy. So the Police Scotland recognise that. But as I said, violence will not be tolerated. There's other things you can do, Robbie, isn't there, to draw attention to the issue and to the seriousness of the climate issue. You yourself said you saw some very unusual sights yesterday. As I was walking around George Square, I came across a hairdresser, actually. I met a hairdresser from Maastricht. And he had excellent hair, by the way. Now, so I had a chat with this chap, whose name I can't remember, and he cycled from Maastricht. I think he left Maastricht about 10 days ago. He got the ferry from Dunkirk, and then all the way up through England on his one of his electrical assisted bikes with a solar panel. And they told me this bike, which had a big, what do you call those things? You know the old bikes? No, you don't. The delivery boys used to go around with bikes with a basket in front with your messages. So he had a big basket in the front with a solar panel on top of it. And you had two wings. You pull these two wings out, and that's two further solar panels. And he said to me, this is the bike he uses to go to his hairdresser shop in, it wasn't in Amsterdam, somewhere near Amsterdam. But using this bike and his solar panels, he's cycled all the way from the south coast of England up to Glasgow yesterday, and then he went through to Edinburgh today. So that's interesting. That doesn't cause any harm.
I think it's certainly showing to the world leaders that there's ways to do it rather than pumping millions worth of carbon into the air. But people will find inventive ways, especially when it's to do with the economy, when it's to do with making the planet greener.
Well, inventive, yes, I hope so. I don't know why, but the Police Scotland today arrested a plastic Loch Ness monster. I don't know what. I don't know what crime it committed, but it's good to see people doing something interesting and imaginative, as you say. It'd be good to see, as the week goes on, what kind of fun, interesting and eye-catching kind of demonstrations or events or, street arts people can bring to the city. So let's hope we get plenty of that, plenty of points raised and plenty of questions asked, and no trouble. Now, the next story we're going to cover very briefly, this is one we will come back to, Robbie. I think it's an important issue, is gender and climate change. Okay, how do those two issues fit together?
The Scottish Government and the UN Women have jointly released a statement saying that women and girls are the worst affected by climate change and face greater burdens from its impacts. A panel of discussions on this issue took place today at COP26 with Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, along with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, the President of Tanzania, Samia Suluhu Hassan, and Estonia's Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. They have issued a statement today which is open to more signatures. The First Minister said, "I'm delighted to convene the Glasgow Women Leadership Initiative with UN Women to put gender equality and climate change at the very forefront of COP26. People in countries who are worst affected by those who have contributed the least to its cause." The First Minister continued, "I am determined that Scotland will lead on progressing this, and at home and internationally where we can, and I can call on all world leaders in signing up to this statement," something I'm sure, Hugh, we can all get behind.
Yes, the First Minister is drawing attention to inequality, and climate justice, of course, is one of the big strands that we will be hearing throughout COP, because, as the First Minister said, very often we find that the people who have caused the damage are not the same people who end up carrying the can for it. So there is, of course, the North and South world, the rich North and the, relatively speaking, the poor South. So again, we'll come back again. That comes up in the climate climate finance topic. We'll move on to in a few seconds. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for the transition? Is it going to be the poor people who have contributed least to producing the global warming? And what the First Minister was reminding us today is that if you have environmental refugees, if you have people who have to move because there's no longer any water or no longer any growing conditions, it's women and girls, women who have to move or girls who have to be taken out of school. So the First Minister, those other Prime Ministers and the United Nations women have been saying, yes, it's generally speaking throughout the world, it's women and girls who are carrying the can. So the important point she's made today is that they have opened the book for other delegates, for other world leaders to sign, to put their names onto that petition. So we've started another example of where the Scottish Government is very busy on today's COP, isn't it, Robbie? The Scottish Government is getting things done. They're putting out feelers, they're making connections, and putting things on the agenda.
Yeah, I think it can only be positive for us. Again, we spoke about it. You mentioned the multi-layer situation. Yeah. I think we're not in the ear of the big dogs, but we're in the ear of countries that are a similar size to us, and ultimately, hopefully, have a common goal. And I think this, the statement here on the Scotland are calling on world leaders to sign. I think that has to be seen as a positive.
Indeed, and we'll see. Let's look at it again next week and see how many people have signed up to that. Another story out today, Robbie, concerns the debate on how much global warming we are going to get. I'm remembering right at the start, in fact just before COP began, the United Nations, of course, released what's sometimes called the business as usual projections. Business as usual means if we continue with the amount of climate mitigation and if we continue with the amount of carbon we're emitting just now, then we're heading for 2.7%. This is by the end of the century. Okay, so these warming predictions are modelled over a very long period of time, so that's something everyone has to get used to. So we began a couple of weeks ago at 2.7, right? And remember, the lower limit agreed at Paris was 1.5, 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now that 1.5 was chosen because, according to climate scientists, that's the limit. Anything after 1.5, and you have, first of all, the certainty of more bushfires, more forest fires, more flooding, more drought and more rain simultaneously. People like Scotland get more rain. Other people which are already semi-arid get less rain. So we already know that's going to happen even if 1.5. So the big debate is, are we going to be able to keep it to 1.5? And if not, what happens if we go to 2 degrees? So the Paris Agreement kind of hedged its bets. It said 1.5 would be nice, but as long as it's not more than 2, at least that won't be catastrophe, right? It'll be bad, but not that bad. Now, the story which has been released by several newspapers today is based on new modelling from the University of Melbourne, which puts predicted warming by the end of the century at 1.9 centigrade. So it's just under the 2 degrees cut-off, but far above the more ambitious 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is the lower limit set out in the Paris Agreement. Okay, so more on that, Robbie?
Yeah, the 1.5 degree limit is seen as a limit of safety beyond which are irreversible impacts of climate breakdown, which will be felt, including heat waves and other extreme weather events.
Now, back to the well, is it 1.5, is it 2 degrees, is it 2.7, or is it 1.9? Now, of course, all of these are projections, and these projections are all based on what if. And what if we open another 100 coal-fired power stations? What if people like Britain open another oil field, like the Campbell Field east of Shetland? So the future warming depends on decisions made today. Are we going to do that, or are we going to refrain and switch over to something else? Now, the reason that the 1.9 projection was released today was actually based on very recent announcements made right here. In fact, I think from what I've read, the Australian projection today is based on India's commitments made in this city just a couple of days ago to come on board and to go for net zero by 2070. So in a way, that's good news. 2070. Are you impressed by that, Robbie?
Not overly, when you're seeing that, there's 2023 banded about, there's 2030 being banded about, there's 2040, 2050. So I think it really does, it shows where each country is in regards to developing a greener economy for them and a greener future for the world. Some countries, you mentioned India, are still reliant on those fossil fuels, on those older, perceived older ways of, heating homes and whatnot. So I think it really does show that it's not a level playing field here.
Yes, it's all about transition, as we've said before. Yes, we still have huge amounts of coal being used in the planet, particularly Australia. Australia is here, at least to the credit of Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia. He has turned up. Now, they are, if you like, one of the culprits. Australia makes a huge amount of coal, which is sent to China for industry and for energy production. So that coal, well, they're not going to stop using that coal next week, are they? So as you said, Robbie, it's all about deadlines. How quickly can they transition away from that coal? Now, India has said, okay, we'll go net zero by 2070, which time a lot of us will be dead. Yes, that's not exactly a rush. That's not exactly an emergency timetable. However, I was looking at one top English economist today, who's Nicholas Stern, who produced the famous Stern report from 2006. Now, that's really the UK government position on climate change, and really, to cut an extremely long report down into a few words, what Nicholas Stern was arguing is that climate change is expensive, but not doing climate change is expensive. But what he said was, the sooner we do it, the cheaper it will be. In other words, the longer we delay, the more expensive it's going to be to turn off the coal and the oil and the gas. So the official British position has been since 2006 to support the Stern report and to spend the money now on mitigating, because if you spend it 20 years' time, you'll have a lot more damage to clear up. So that's what the economists say. Yes, there is a cost to giving up coal and oil, but there's also a cost to not giving it up. And in the long run, the cost of not mitigating is going to be more expensive. So actually, Nicholas Stern today said, well, okay, 2070, it's a long time, but it's good, because at last India is on board. At last India has said, yes, we agree, there is a need to go to climate neutral, to carbon neutral. So let's look on the bright side. I've been saying all along since we started discussing COP26, it's a optimism, pessimism. Well, it's that as well, but I'm also thinking sometimes people say, yes, we can do it, and sometimes people say, disaster, we've got to move right now. Well, let's just keep the optimistic going. Right, so the main topic today, Robbie, and we'll spend a few minutes on this now, is finance. Okay, are you leading on this one?
Yeah, I'll go for it.
Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So moving to a sustainable world economy means that spending money on the green transition. The conference has been looking at the two sides of the problem: the public sector, or the government spending, and the private sector, which means investments made by banks or other firms, with the aim of returning a profit. Mark Carney, a former governor for the Bank of England, has unveiled a $130 trillion in climate finance commitments. Mr. Carney speaks on behalf of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ for short, of course, which now counts to 450 firms representing the $130 trillion in financial assets. This was backed up by a statement today from Rishi Sunak, the UK's finance minister, who said that Britain would be the world's first net zero aligned financial centre.
Yeah, okay, so I've been waiting for Britain to be a net zero aligned financial sector, Robbie, and the only thing I'm waiting for now is an explanation of what exactly that means. So let's just unpick what Mark Carney has said. Now, first of all, Mark Carney is a voice that people listen to.
Yeah.
Was the former governor of the Bank of England. He held that post for several years, and before that he had a similar job for the State Bank of Canada. Trained by a Scottish economist, incidentally. So Mark Carney is a voice of authority. But let's just be a little bit sceptical. I'm going to go back to being pessimistic for a minute, if I may. So he's got $130 trillion, has he? And he's got 450 companies on board. Okay, now, do we know what those people are going to do with their 130 trillion? There has been questions raised today about whether those 450 have actually said we're not going to spend any more money in fossil fuel. And in fact, Bloomberg reports that several of those companies in Mark Carney's team are simultaneously saying, yes, we're going to spend money on green projects, but also we're still spending money on coal. In fact, since the 2015 Paris Accords, banks have invested $4 trillion into oil, gas or coal, and that includes $500 billion this year. So maybe we're getting closer to an explanation of what what was it? What did Rishi Sunak were doing? We're going to be a net zero aligned financial centre in the City of London he's talking about. Now, does that mean net zero? Does that mean we'll spend $1 billion on green technology, but we'll also spend $1 billion on coal? So that means we're balanced. Is that what net zero means?
I think, for you and I, it's open to interpretation until we're told otherwise here. I think net zero is all green and completely moving away from fossil fuels, but it's very hard to move away from something that powered, and heated homes and put food on the table for plenty of people up and down, not only Scotland but the UK and as a whole. It's going to be very hard to move on from that, but ultimately for the planet it will be for the better. But we spoke about it previously in regard to the deadlines. Is it going to be 2023, 2030 or so on and so forth? And for countries like ourselves, it's going to be a wee bit easier because we've not got that standing start, unlike less developed countries.
Well, it's a dilemma. I think we have to face the fact that countries have a dilemma. It's not easy to make this transition. And in fact, Nicola Sturgeon was questioned on CNN yesterday. She was speaking to Amanpour on CNN. And she was, of course, confronted with the question of what would Scotland do with the Cambo oil field. So Scotland is sitting on billions of barrels of oil, and we have to decide we're not going to use it. It's going to stay there. Now, of course, it's not up to Scotland. The decision on opening up that new oil field west of Shetland lies with the UK government, and they really haven't made it clear if they're going to go ahead or not yet. But Nicola Sturgeon made it clear on the Amanpour interview that it's difficult. It's a really difficult choice to make. So we have to do what the Scottish Government calls a just transition. If we're not going to do that, we have to do something else. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that the private sector investments, we have to make sure that those, how many did we say, $130 trillion, we have to make sure that they have somewhere to go. Those dollars need investment and they need a return.
Yeah, especially with the 450 companies, as we've mentioned. You spoke about it earlier, saying, are all of these companies going to say, right, we'll completely move away from fossil fuels?
Well, they haven't said that yet, so it's unclear exactly. I mean, obviously, as I said before, Mark Carney is a considerable man. He's a voice worth listening to. He knows what he's talking about. So let's watch this space and let's see how much of that money is going to be invested in something that actually is sustainable, something that doesn't cause more damage. But I'd like to come back to this business of what exactly is meant by net zero. Now, let me just look for this. The Secretary General of the United Nations is, of course, Senor Guterres. Antonio Guterres opened the conference on Monday, but before he said recently there is a deficit of credibility and a surplus of confusion over emissions reductions and net zero targets, with different meanings and different metrics. So Senor Guterres shares my confusion about what exactly does it mean if London is what did I say, it's a net zero or something. Anyway, so what exactly does that mean? Antonio Guterres doesn't really know what it means either, right? So one country's definition of net zero might be completely different to another country's. And in any case, some Greens think that net zero is really just greenwashing. Net zero could be taken to mean we'll just continue making as much carbon as we did before, but we'll do something else. We'll plant a tree, or we'll dig a hole in the ground and put the carbon in it, right? So, well, net zero, is that what we should be aiming for, or should we just be aiming for reduce? Let's just make less.
I think net zero hopefully will be achievable in not only your time but in my time, Hugh. I think it's something that we need. It's something that's going to be ultimately do good for the planet that we've not been doing for the last 150 years with with fossil fuels. So I think it's something that would be welcome, but a lot of effort has to go into it. And it's funny how we're on finance. A lot of money has to go into it because we've mentioned it's not an even playing field for all these countries here. Some countries are going to need more investment and more assistance, really.
And that brings us to the second strand of because you said earlier on, Robbie, on the one hand, we've got government investment, and on the other hand, we've got the private investment that we've been talking about. So 130 trillion. I'll just finish on that point and then we'll have a quick reminder of the public sector commitments. So Mark Carney further said today that he believes that the $130 trillion quoted is more than enough if invested correctly. So that's the whole point, of course. What kind of technologies are we going to develop? Now, again, Chancellor Sunak, who opened today's Finance Day in Glasgow, said, "It's easy to feel daunted by the task ahead, with sea levels rising, droughts and wildfires spreading. But I feel optimistic because there are so many business, finance ministers and investors, all with one goal, to deliver a Paris promise, to deflect the world's wealth, to protect the planet." So I think deflect the world's wealth, I think he's saying, yes, let's rechannel that investment in a different direction. So again, Mark Carney's optimistic that we can do that, but you have to create market opportunities. The money doesn't flow into a technology for charitable reasons. Money only flows into a business in order to make more money, of course.
Yeah, you mentioned at the very start, Hugh, at the start of the programme, there has to be a profit in it for these for these businesses. And again, to just kind of backpedal to where we were with the 450, that Mark Carney knew of, 130 trillion divided between them. There's got to be a lot of cohesion, and there's got to be a lot of understanding for these companies to part with this money and say, right, okay, I'm going to get right behind it and I'm going to go for it. Okay,
so let's see if we can bring the incentives into line so that there is actually green jobs and green profits to be made. I suppose that's what we're talking about. Can we make the green dollar? So Rishi Sunak went on to say there today that 80% of the world's economy has committed to net zero or to carbon neutrality targets, and another 35 yet to sign up. So we'll see if they do. Now, Robbie, you mentioned earlier on the attractively named Glasgow Financial Alliance, the GFANZ. So that was actually set up earlier this year with Mark Carney as its joint lead. And they have the aim of do exactly what we said, of directing some of that private sector investment into green technology. Rishi Sunak has also said he wants to rewire the entire global financial system for net zero. And he also stated that it's now mandatory in Britain for businesses to disclose their climate information. So businesses have to not only do the usual financial reporting, but also say how much climate damage or how much CO2 they've been responsible for.
I think that's something, Hugh, that might see a real kind of shift in it. Because if you have to declare something, you're going to realise, okay, well, we're using X amount or we're using Y amount. I think that's something that we might start to see a right kind of chunk of it, change, and probably for the better.
I know there's a new type of accounting. Actually, it's at its early days, but accounting for the environment. That's what Rishi Sunak is talking about. Not just including financial information, but also including environmental information and what have we done over the last year. Finally, today Rishi Sunak closed his speech here in Glasgow saying, "The UK will go further than ever before and become the first net zero aligned financial centre." So as I've said before, Antonio Guterres isn't entirely clear what net zero means because there are different definitions. So to solve that confusion, also, Senor Guterres has announced that he intends to establish an expert panel to propose clear standards to measure and analyse net zero commitments from non-state actors. So by non-state actors, I guess he basically means companies. So what we need is a kind of a standardisation. So if somebody in California says, "Hey, we are net zero," and somebody in Spain says, "Yeah, we're also net zero," so do they mean the same thing? Are they talking about the same actual definitions? Are they adding it up in the same way? So yeah, that's obviously something that would help. It would help to give clarity to what exactly that means. Now, that brings me to Greta Thunberg. Actually, I don't know if you heard this, but I won't repeat her language, but she apparently has been recorded on camera today chanting some words which we will not use on Broadcasting Scotland, Robbie. So she's given her own personal net zero commitment today. I don't know if this one impresses you much, Robbie. She said that from now on, if ever I say something nasty, I'm going to balance it with something nice. There you are. That's net zero. Well, that's just about it for today. Oh, I forgot to talk about the other thing. Sorry. Apart from I did say earlier on, I apologise. I said on the one hand, we're dealing with the private sector investment, and on the other hand, there's how much have governments themselves committed. We had in 2009 an agreement basically that the rich world would give, I think it was $100 billion to the poor world to help them develop the kind of technologies. As you said earlier on, Robbie, some countries like India, if they've got coal, they're going to use it. Right? The rich countries can't say to India, right, we've been using coal for 200 years. That's caused all these problems. So you're going to have to stop using coal because of the problems we've created. So again, this is from 20, 30 years ago. The countries of the world have said, okay, if the rich countries want us to stop polluting, right, and if you want us to give up all this stuff which we have not to use, right, you have to pay us. Is that reasonable?
I think, yeah, because we've mentioned the almost kind of the shift in the balance here. Really, I think it's important to understand that these countries, some of them just can't afford to move away from fossil fuels, and like you say, they're going to use what's at your disposal. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's, but maybe the way you put it, you're going to have to pay us to change it. That can be subjective. That can be subjective. It's maybe you're not going to need to pay us to use it, but give us a hand and help us use it.
Okay, yes, that's a better way of putting it. The way I said it sounds like blackmail, but the point is we've already agreed to that. In many previous COPs, the rich world, that's the European Union, America, we've already agreed a long time ago. In principle, if we want you to decarbonise, then we accept it. We're going to have to make a contribution. We're going to have to pay. So they've already said that. So the big issue this week about that 100 billion that was promised in 2009, the big issue is, when are we actually going to hand over the bucks, right? So again, Rishi Sunak has been saying to people, yeah, we need to actually do that. We need to stop talking about it and hand it over. So under the chairmanship of Alok Sharma, of course, the UK government minister, who's the president of the conference, he is actually convening meetings of the important parties there to say, let's get a definite timetable to deliver that 100 billion by next year and some more the year after, and really between now and 2025. So that 100 billion, which we in the rich world already promised a long time ago, has to actually start getting delivered. So those are the two strands of Finance Day in Glasgow. On the one hand, the whole business of the green buck, as I called it earlier on, how can we channel that huge amount of private investment towards green technologies, and on the other hand, when are the rich countries actually going to hand over the funding which we already promised several years ago? Okay, so that was it today, Robbie. That was Finance Day at COP26 down at Finniston. So we've seen again some of the strands which are going to be very important as we come out of COP. We've seen various initiatives that have been once again brought to the surface, and what this COP is all about is really saying, when are we going to actually do it? When are countries going to actually deliver the commitments that they've actually given? Okay, so on Broadcasting Scotland, we're going to, of course, continue to cover the main topics on COP26 right here in Glasgow. And so I think, Robbie, will just finally, we're going to explain to people what you can do if you want to help Broadcasting Scotland make more programmes.
Yeah, if you want to help us make more programmes here at Broadcasting Scotland, please feel free to go over to the website and pledge £5 a month. It'll help create jobs in Scotland, and it'll help create a real media output for Scotland that isn't affiliated to anything or anyone.
That's right, Robbie. As I said before, actually, a lot of people are saying we've flown over to Glasgow, or we're up in Scotland, or we're flying into Glasgow Press Week. But we're not, Robbie. We were here all the time. So if you want broadcasting about Scotland, which is actually in Scotland from Scotland's point of view, then give us a hand, please. As Robbie says, please feel free to donate. Everything you spend will go into making more programmes for Scotland from a Scottish point of view. So I'm Hugh Stewart.
I'm Robbie Boyd.
So thanks for watching Scotland at 7, and it'll be Maggie tomorrow. We'll see you again later. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye now.